Hello, you are excused to think that the best stonework one can find in Tuscany is the handsome David statue standing in Florence. That's a common mistake and one that causes people to be dragged by the floods of tourists following mainstream ideas. When no, the best stonework of all Tuscany, likely Italy, and maybe even Europe, is to be found in the unsung villages of Santa Severa or Orbetello. I can't decide which one. Those two beauties are called Mura Etrusca or Etruscan walls, which is a misleading name, like so many things about this region's history. A flaw that we must clarify to properly appreciate these Tuscan wonders. Before the invasion by the barbarian hordes of tourists, the Tuscan capital, Florence, would be quite charming. Florence benefited extensively from the Renaissance period in the 16th century AD, being home to so many bigger than life characters like the Medici family, Leonardo da Vinci, and all the other Ninja Turtles. However, if that period was called the Renaissance, it means something great had died. And it did, died and burned, as we'll see. There was the classical Roman period, and before that there was the Etruscans, and even before and earlier and the best ones, the Cyclops. This region is named Tuscany in reference to the Etruscans, that were an Iron Age people heavily engaged in the formation of Rome, up to being the earlier kings of the future imperial capital city. Still, despite all that protagonism and the extensive Roman writings about them, the Etruscans are, to this date, very misunderstood. Which is comprehensible, considering the Etruscans are an odd cookie of a people, a one-of-a-kind culture that leaves academics struggling to fit them in their little boxes. Italy is a hub for Cyclopean masonry, featuring some of the best works the Cyclops ever done. And the region of Tuscany could not go without them. In fact, about 3 or 4 or 5 of the most striking examples of polygonal walls are sitting in Tuscany, and for that reason being named Etruscan, despite only one of those deserving the shame, whilst the others are likely older. Well, to get into that conclusion, we first have to drop an eye and meet the walls. Number 1. A true work of art of a Cyclopean wall is Holding Orbetello. Just imagine an artificial island built on top of tight-fitting polygonal masonry. It's a wonder for sure. Today, Orbetello is still a beautiful city that hardly anyone visits, probably because it now looks less magical, with some of the walls damaged by an ugly parking lot. Then too, not so striking, mostly for having a lot of work done on top, Pirgi or Santa Severa has the most massive Cyclopean stonework of all of Europe, combining huge polygonal rocks in a tightly fitted 3D puzzle. In number 3 is Cosa, just a stone throw away from Orbetello, where we can find some of the best preserved polygonal stones, I guess benefiting from not being underwater. The number 4 are the big rough boulders of Rosella. They are exemplary of what usually is called Cyclopean, being the stones rough and large, piled in the big circle wall. And finally, we have this little imitation in Banditascia or Cerveteri, that is the only one we are sure was built by the Etruscan. On the other hand, we cannot say it's really polygonal, being mostly a mise-en-scène. The polygonal walls in Italy are not usually called Cyclopean, which is a common blunder from people that know nothing about the ancient unibrow builders. However, the walls in places like Alatri, a bit to the south of Rome, are as Cyclopean as they could be. For starters, the Romans called these walls Saturnian, and Saturn is the Roman name for the brother of the Cyclops, an ancient king that had fled Greece. Also coming from Greece, but in Roman times, is Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a scholar considered to be the most authoritative source about the Etruscans. In his history book, Dionysius wrote that the walls in Santa Severa were Pelasgian, and not Etruscan. Pelasgian means the first man, or the first populations, i.e., those old people that were replaced. So, calling them Saturnian, Pelasgian, or Cyclopean does not make a difference. All those words are synonyms, or they were synonyms, for 1,000 years or more, before people starting to talk about mythical one-eyed giants. The Romans knew too well about the Etruscans and had a low opinion of them, using Etruscan to imply debauchery or prostitute. That reputation was partially deserved and partial to the Romans, because the Etruscans were very sexually explicit, and also that the last kings of Rome, the rulers that the Republicans despised, were an Etruscan family called Tarquinius, from the city of Tarquini in Tuscany. In fact, the oldest building in Rome is the Severian Wall, and that wall was built by one of those Etruscan kings, and that wall is non-polygonal at all, being made with square blocks of a soft volcanic ash stone named tuffo, just like all the other stuff the Etruscans and not the Romans would do. After getting rid of the Etruscan kings in Rome, the Romans famously went on to conquer all of Europe, including Tuscany, leaving their mark everywhere, in the roads, the laws, the language, etc., etc. But beside all that, what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, not the polygonal walls they didn't. The Romans did not build polygonal walls anywhere, not even in Rome. The Etruscans were not Pelasgian or Cyclopean, and also not an Indo-European people. Their language is weird and unrelated to anything around. For a long time, academics have been trying, without success, to force the Etruscan language to fit into any predetermined category, asserting the Etruscans were coming from Greece, Albania, or Egypt, or whatever. But to no effect, because the Etruscan culture is unique, as demonstrated by that mini look-alike polygonal wall plus what they had put inside. The little fake wall is in Banditascia, a necropolis or a cemetery, with thousands of tombs. Pretty as it is, Banditascia did not require any special stonemason skill, being small, not structural, and using that soft stone, tuffo. Worse built than the cemeteries were the cities, that are all lacking in stone buildings. Even the Etruscan temples are cheap, being made of wood and terracotta, that is mud, which is bizarre for a people that some claim were creating islands on top of super advanced polygonal walls. It cannot be. If you've been following this channel, you've heard about the Indo-Europeans chasing the Cyclops all around Europe, during the Bronze Age. If you are not following, then there's a good reason to start doing it. Not to lose everything, I'll revisit this briefly. In very old Europe, before the Bronze Age, the megalithic builders did some big stuff with massive rocks. Those buildings were, for the most part, tumulus, meaning made to bury dead people inside. Then, at around 3000 BC, a new culture got into Europe, the indo-europeans. The official name for those invaders is Yamnaya, a word that means literally burial ground. These two peoples, megalithic and indo-european, different as they were, both put their dead into the ground. Now, if a third culture living nearby were cremating their dead, it would be ridiculous to claim those burners belonged to any of the previous two groups. But that's exactly what academics tried to do with the Etruscans. Inside the tombs in that Cerveteri Etruscan cemetery we keep talking about, there are urns for ashes, revealing the unique character of the Etruscans. The Etruscans cremated their dead, burned to ashes, they barbecued grandpa. Of all the prehistoric peoples in Europe, the only others that cremated their dead were the Villanovan, who also lived in Tuscany and were the predecessors of the Etruscan just a few centuries before. And also, from another bit earlier, in Central Europe, there's the urn-filled culture. The urn-filled name comes from urn and field, because, you guessed it, they roasted the family. The Etruscans, the Villanovans, and the urn-filled cremated their dead. This shows it's a unique line of cultures, migrating south during the Bronze Age, and unrelated to anyone in their neighborhood. If the fake miniature polygonal tomb in Banditacia is surely Etruscan and not really polygonal, the other walls in Tuscany are not. Etruscan, I mean, because they are polygonal for real, including being older than anything around them. Let's see. Santa Severa, with the massive 3D blocks, was built as a port city named Pyrgi. In the good old days, the port supplied the city of Cerveteri, that place with the Banditace cemetery. But not for long. Just 5 kilometers up the road from Pyrgi, now Santa Severa, there's another port city, now Santa Marinella, once called Punicum, because by the 4th century BC, when the Romans invaded Tuscany, the Carthaginian, aka the Punic, sided with the Etruscan, and by then the Etruscans were no longer using Pyrgi as a port. Oh, that's a lot of names, please simplify. Punicum is younger than Pyrgi, and Pyrgi is younger than the walls it was built on. Thus making sense why Dionysius of Halicarnassus claimed that Pyrgi was built by the Pelasgian. Still too many names, very confusing, do it again. See these big blocks? Big stone, old. Barbecued grandpa, also old, but big stone, older. Well, we'll always have Orbetello. That is a beautiful little city. Still, it's hard to imagine how really amazing it was back when the Cyclops reclaimed this island out of the lagoon. Especially how impressive it would be for the people arriving there by sea. Careful! As for age, the Orbetello wall, for being under the city and literally on top of water, makes immediately known that it is older than any other building ever done in that island. Nearby is Cosa, a weird thing, because we know nothing about its origins. The first time this city is mentioned is well into Roman times. For that, Cosa is said to be not even Etruscan, but a Roman thing, ignoring that the Romans did not do for us polygonal walls. Go on. However, if we look at the perfectly carved stones of Cosa, we'll see they are not so different from the ones in nearby Orbetello, so it should be from about the same old age. Also in Tuscany there is Rosella, a megalithic walled city that could be called Cyclopean in the conventional sense that the word is used today, with rough and big boulders piled up. This brutish big rock type of construction is usually said to be older than the fancy polygonal, and if we follow that logic, Rosella should be even older than the already old Santa Severa, making all the walls just old, very old. And again, grilled family second, building Cyclops first. There you have it. Only that small wall in Banditace Cemetery was built by the late Etruscans, who were not great builders and just tried to imitate the older and more sophisticated Cyclopean walls, the real deal, to be found at the base of Orbetello or Santa Severa, bringing about that recurrent Cyclopean mystery. Why are polygonal walls both the best and the oldest constructions, not only in Tuscany but nearly everywhere? We will never know, and to try and disprove that theory, next we'll visit one site that is likely the exception to this rule. That's it for today. Hope you liked it. See you soon. Okay,